Hello, and welcome back to Telling the Bees. This is episode 5 of the Special Dispatch podcast. I am very excited to talk about Sympathy for the Devil today, but before we get into that, I just want to do a little bit of housekeeping up top. I realized that my recording schedule got completely thrown out of whack. I'm going to LA for work, and it just threw a wrench in. I will also say that I've been writing a lot, so it's like as I approach the end of my, novel writing process, I've been a little bit lost in the sauce trying to do everything right because I'm still posting a bunch of TikToks a week. I'm doing this. I'm doing a Substack every week, trying to get that to every other week. And the book club, I think I've taken on too much, I fear. So I dropped the book club down to every other month. And obviously this will not continue past, well, not obviously, yeah, like I've said a couple of times in the previous episodes, this is going to have to be a limited edition because it is simply too much on my plate. Well, writing is the dream. Writing is what I want to do. And so I feel like I have to finish the novel before I can come back. Like, I do enjoy doing the podcast. I really, really enjoy having these long form episodes and like talking to you guys or talking at you guys, honestly. But it's interesting because it's like something that I really, really enjoy, but I did not expect it to be so much work. And so I've been kind of stuck in this limbo of, well, let's just do it for a couple more weeks and then figure out how to finish everything and like do everything right. So I appreciate everyone. As I say every single week, I appreciate every single person who listens. All of the comments are so sweet. You guys are so nice and like loving and genuinely so grateful. Just hearing that you guys appreciate my analysis, that you guys are vibing with everything that I'm putting out, it means the world. And I know that this is sort of different, right? Everything is different. A Substack is different from a TikTok, is different from a tweet, is different than a podcast. But I appreciate the fact that you guys are making the time to sit down and listen to for 45 minutes of me ranting and raving. Next week, I will be having a guest. I'm calling those segments Conversations with Friends. So I'm going to talk about Drag Race with a friend. I'm going to talk about movies with a separate friend. And then I'm also trying for the finale, I'm going to get one of my friends, Mackenzie, to talk about the motherhood issue, that video that went viral, that TikTok demonetized. If you want to talk about some real bullshit, I'm really mad about it because it got 2 million views. So that's kind of shady that they were actually, this isn't qualified. So I want to talk about how her life has changed due to having a baby and the way that she riled up the internet when she said that married people should pay for single people's dinner. And then everyone in her comments was like, "You're fucking evil. How dare you do this?" And I said, "Oh, okay." I think we've lost the plot a little bit as a society. I think that kindness is missing, grace is missing, empathy is missing. I also will say that we are in a crisis of people saying that they don't have energy and are more depressed than ever. And it's capitalism. And it's just like, with everything going on in the news right now, with this administration, with fucking Trump and everything, it's so overwhelming that I'm definitely seeing a rise of desperately depressed people. And my heart is going out to everyone. Like, we have to take care of ourselves. We have to stay strong. We have to keep the fight up. I think everything is connected. I think like it is impossible to talk about media without talking about politics, and it's impossible to talk about politics without talking about media and culture. So up top, run of show. Today we're going to be talking about what I call Sympathy for the Devil, which is a lot of AI stories, a lot of robot stories, a lot of media around robots and AI and the sort of what it means to be human, what TV tropes calls what measure is a non-human. Then I'm going to talk about Netflix and their presentation of Wicked Men. I watched Temptation Island and I'm watching Love Never Lies Poland, and I want all of these men thrown in Guantanamo Bay. I'm so sorry. Like, ACAB, abolish, but not for these men. I've fully been BuzzFeed 2014 feminism pilled, where now, before, I would try to be a little bit objective, and I'm actually making a video later about the Harry Sassoon situation, which is basically West Elm Caleb, but for Gen Z. And now Netflix has made me full, like, all men are evil, all men are dogs. And it's like, obviously a very specific sample of man, right? Because it's all of these, like, proto-influencer bodybuilder losers who are going on these shows to, like, get famous and, like, an OnlyFans or whatever. But they are all sick and twisted and disgusting. And I'm literally like, I'm gonna, like, be celibate. I don't know. I mean, I'm not dating these kind of men, but they're evil. And then finally, I'm going to do White Lotus. We're going to talk about 305. So the big moments, right? The Sam Rockwell moment, the Sam Rockwell monologue that I posted about. So I've already sort of done a short analysis, but I'll recap that here. And I'll talk about a couple of points of internet drama that I think connect with his monologue nicely. And then I will also I'm actually going to save space, so letting you in behind the screen, behind the scenes, behind the curtain. I will show you, well, not show you, letting you in behind the curtain. I will save some space for the White Lotus 306 analysis where I'm going to just do rapid fire reactions. So I will leave a little space there to record my feelings on that to upload this on Monday. So you'll get 2 episodes of White Lotus in one as an apology for not updating this in time. So let's get into it. I want to start off with Anybot and the use of robot stories as a sort of, well, obviously this is a topic that we're all sort of familiar with. We've all seen stuff with robots in it, right? So like the Jetsons, and there's so many examples of media. Of course, now that I'm sitting here looking at this document, I can't think of a single example of media. But we understand the purpose of a robot story, right? It's sort of similar to, I think, what X-Men tries to do, where they have a marginalized community, but to make it a little bit more universal, because I think that whenever something is very clearly about racism, people will sort of turn away from it. And that's not specifically a white person thing. I've seen it happen on both sides, or every side of the aisle, where people will say, well, I'm not really interested in this. There are people of color and Black people who say, I don't want to watch anything with slavery in it, right? So there is this element of, if it's too obviously about racism, if it's too obviously about discrimination, then people are just not going to tap in, which obviously is, interesting / problematic on its face. But I think the use and purpose of a robot story is both to explore subjugation, to explore discrimination, to explore isolation in a way that is also a sort of moral quandary, right? Because ultimately the question, I'm thinking about AI and the Steven Spielberg movie that came out in 2001, I think, with Haley Joel Osment. The issue is always, what do you consider to be a human, right? What do you consider to be a soul? What do you consider to be cognition? What do you consider to be processing and being alive, right? The Turing test, this idea that you have to know that you're not conscious to be conscious. And I think with all of the AI that we have right now, as of March 2025, God knows what it will look like in a year. With all of the AI that we have right now, it's a simulacrum, right? It's a simulacrum of thought. It's a simulacrum of consciousness, where it's not actually thinking. It's regurgitating and predicting and using like advanced language models to sort of tell us what we want to hear, or tell us responses that sound alive, quote unquote alive, but they're not alive, right? It's a machine. It is code. And so if and when we reach, God, not when, but scholars in Silicon Valley are actually a little bit terrified of the singularity. It's this idea that when AI finally becomes conscious, it will destroy us. So that's unfortunately something that they are like, it's not a question of if. If we go down this path, then it will happen. And I'm just like, okay, great, fucking, I'll scream. So I obviously have an anti-AI bias, just a tad, where I'm like a little bit scared of what is down the pike. But yeah, so thinking about the singularity and thinking about actual consciousness, thinking about what will happen or what could happen, there is this idea of like a soul. There is this idea of what it means to be alive, and I think it's an interesting topic to explore in these stories. I just saw Mickey 17 last week, and I'll talk more about it next week, or I guess in 2 weeks. I just saw Mickey 17, and it also sort of explores this issue with cloning, where, I don't know if you've seen the trailer, but minor spoiler alert, the movie is about a man who enters a cloning program to be a sort of human guinea pig for this space mission, and he's a human guinea pig, and so there obviously is a mishap, and the question of who is real and what is real and who are you and who am I sort of comes up, and that's what the movie explores. And I think using robots and AI as a form of exploring this is ultimately sort of interesting. I think the issue, to bring it back to X-Men, right? Or I was going to say Charmed, but that's not as good of an example because they were a secret. But the issue with X-Men and a lot of these stories, when people do the subjugated class thing in media, is that you cannot make the subjugated class super powered, right? Because then it doesn't actually work as an allegory for discrimination. If you are saying we actually do have a valid reason to discriminate against these people, not that in the world of X-Men they do, but they are also, the humans sort of have a point where they're like, these people can blow us up with their minds. It's not a one-to-one. It's not apples to apples, and it therefore creates a world where people can say, well, I actually stand with the humans because I don't think that these people should be like unregistered and just like allowed to walk around, right? So anyway, looping all the way back around, Anybot is interesting because it's used as a metaphor for women's subjugation and domestic violence. So spoiler alert, or trigger warning. It's a little bit thinly veiled, but I think it's really interesting. It was one of my favorite books of 2024. I've talked about it at length on my channel. I loved it. It is out on paperback on Tuesday. This isn't sponsored. They just like emailed me to tell me that it was coming out, and I said, okay, I'll mention it in a video. Yeah, it's coming out in paperback. I really loved it because I think it was really subtle the way that Annybot is about this robot named Annie who is created for her owner's pleasure. She's a sex doll, sex robot, and she becomes autodidactic where she is learning, right? So instead of being static and only experiencing the world every day as a sort of new person, sort of like a 51st date situation, she becomes able to remember situations and remember and learn and sort of process information in a new way that makes her grow in humanity or the simulacrum of humanity by leaps and bounds. So she's learning every day, and unfortunately, part of that learning, this is why I really liked the book, is she has a feminist awakening. She's sort of, why do I exist solely for this man? Why does this man control everything I do? Why can't I go outside? Why can't I talk to anyone? And I think the author Sierra Greer was really, really, really subtle. I would love to talk to her because I think that I don't know if I'm the only person to say this. I haven't actually read a ton of the reviews, and some of the reviews were mixed. The novel really worked for me. You know, your mileage may vary. I respect everyone's opinions. It really worked for me because I was very clear on it as an allegory for domestic violence, right? The fact that Annie can't go outside, the fact that Annie is completely controlled, the fact that it's so subtle psychologically where she is completely subjugated by this man, right? Even when she is thinking about leaving and she's like, I want to be my own person, I want to do my own thing, she's like, I was created to love him, I was created for him, and I can't imagine a world where he is not here, right? She's completely isolated from her friends, she doesn't know a world without him, she doesn't have any money without him. So, in both these subtle and obvious ways, it is a sort of retelling of what it means to be isolated in a relationship from the perspective of an emotionally abusive relationship or a relationship where something else is going on. I think another show that did this really well was Kevin Can F Himself, or Kevin Can Fuck Himself. I can curse, I'm not on TikTok. Kevin Can Fuck Himself was really interesting because I got a really, really, really strong sense that it was about DV, and I made a video about it and people were like, wait, oh my God, like I there were so many scenes of her like blacking out, or she was always like getting hurt randomly. Like, she was hurting her hand, she was hurting her finger, she was falling, she had a black eye, and the show would do it. It's so well done. If you haven't watched Kevin Can Fuck Himself, it's 2 seasons. It's on Netflix. Is it 2 seasons? I think it's 2 seasons. It's on Netflix now. It was canceled, but it's really interesting where they sort of cut between the sitcom world, the idealized world where Kevin is like a hee good guy, very like Family Guy, very King of Queens, that whole Everybody Loves Raymond thing where the guy is like a bumbling idiot and the wife is beautiful, but you know, she's always struggling to please him. And so in the world of Kevin Can Fuck Himself, it alternates between the dark, gritty FX world where she's always getting hurt and being actively treated like shit by this guy versus the sitcom world where he's like a good guy or a funny guy. And I got such a sense that this was actually about something else. And maybe I'm wrong, maybe I'm just making shit up in my analysis, but I am pretty sure that that show is about domestic violence and like trying to claw your way out of a bad relationship and away from a bad man. Um, Anybot was interesting because it explores the subjugation in a subtle way, again, where nothing is like said out loud. And you would think it's like about a sex robot who's escaping her owner. Like it's not that subtle, but the psychological work and the interiority that Annie is afforded and given is really, really well done. Moving on to the good for you moment, and I will tie this back to the Buffy episode that I love after I talk about Companion. Companion is the newest good for you movie. Now I'm realizing this is a little bit of a spoiler. Okay, well, the movie came out a month ago. Spoilers, if you don't want to hear about Companion, skip ahead, but I apologize for spoiling you. I will hide this from the show notes so that I'm not like spoiling the movie for everyone on Instagram. But Companion is the latest Good For You movie, or Good For Her movie, excuse me, that just came out. It stars Jack Quaid and Sophie Thatcher, Queen, my horror queen. I loved her in Heretic. I've loved her in Yellow Jackets. She's so, so good. And in case you can't tell from that giant pause where I was like, I don't want to spoil anyone, but the episode is what the episode is about, I fear. So it is about a sex robot who, you know, she gets hers, I will say. No spoilers, but I think it's really interesting because I think that movie was also an exploration of subjugation, and I think it's much, much, much more openly feminist, where it's like she's being treated like shit, she has to get her revenge, right? Obviously, because it's a horror movie, but also the fact that it's, again, using robots, using AI to explore this issue of women being dominated by men, feminism, women's subjugation, women's empowerment, right? The ability to say, I want to make my own choices. I don't want to be owned by a man. I don't want to live in a situation where a man is having all of the money and paying all of the bills and I have no freedom or agency. It's really interesting, and it really explores this idea of what it means to not have agency in your relationship, right? Because on its face, sure, it's about a robot. It's about a female robot who's owned by a man and she does everything for him. But it's actually about agency. It's about exploring yourself and exploring your identity in a way that allows you freedom and allows you agency, right? That's why when a lot of people on TikTok will rant about boyfriend land and this idea that so many women not allow themselves, but are sort of subsumed into their relationships. Obviously, American society, it has created a system where women only feel, or a lot of women, I say I'm not speaking for everyone as a man, a lot of women only feel sort of validated or whole if they are in a relationship because that's what society tells us is important, right? It is more important to get married and have kids than to get your PhD and get a job. And so it creates this weird system where we are not acknowledging the system. We're treating the person as if they're bad, but also using these movies and using genre to explore societal ills, right? That's what horror is. That's what sci-fi is. That's what fantasy is, right? Using genre to explore the issue of women's subjugation and women sort of exploring their own agency away from these horrible toxic men is always going to be fascinating and it's always going to be really interesting. Both Anybot and Companion remind me of one of my favorite Buffy episodes. I always say it's one of my underrated Buffy episodes. No one ever talks about it, but I love it. It makes me cry every single time. It's called I Was Made to Love You, and it is about a female robot who is created by a horrible man to obviously another sex doll, sex robot situation. This keeps coming up. Interesting. Another sex robot situation where she goes haywire and starts fighting Buffy for the guy because she thinks that Buffy wants her man. And it's interesting because like in this world she's super powered. I think in Companion and Anibot they were normal humans. They didn't have any special abilities outside of connecting to the internet and downloading information, I guess, in Companion. If you can't tell from the title of the episode, I Was Made to Love You, it is very clear what her issue is. She is programmed to only specifically exist in the context of this relationship. She doesn't try to get free. She doesn't try to escape, and I think that's what makes it a tragedy. The saddest part of the episode is when Warren, the guy who created her and a villain of season 6 of Buffy, is like, I don't want her anymore. She shuts down and she has this really sad moment where she's sitting with Buffy in the park and she's like, well, if I don't have him, then there's no reason for me to exist, right? Like, I have nothing to live for. And it's just really sad. It makes me cry every single time because she was programmed to only exist for this guy and exist in the context of the relationship. And when she doesn't have that, she literally dies. She says, I can't live without a man. And it's like worst case scenario for a lot of people, but just desperately sad that her programming didn't allow her anything else, right? Whereas Anibot and Companion were able to sort of exist on their own and exist outside of their relationships, and their identities weren't explicitly tied to these guys, or their identities were explicitly tied to these guys, but they were able to sort of escape it and move beyond it. The robot in I Was Made to Love You never, and I forgot her name, which is sad, but she never got a chance to explore agency. She never got a chance to like be her own person or do her own thing because she died at the end of the episode. And it's devastating. It makes me cry. Moving on to another book recommendation. I talk about Speak by Louisa Hall. This came out, I think, 10 years ago now in 2016, and I'm obsessed with it. I've talked about it on TikTok before. It makes me cry. It's absolutely moving and gorgeous. It is a sort of like Cloud Atlas where it's 6 interlocking stories and it takes you on a sort of multi-century, I want to say. Like I think it starts on like 1800s in a multi-century journey about creation of robotics, the creation of AI, the creation of the Turing test, and it takes you all the way to a dystopian future where there are baby bots and robots. And it is a really, really fascinating look at connection, the ability to speak, the inability to speak, the inability to communicate, isolation, devastation, just absolutely gorgeous writing. So I'm not going to take you through every single one of the characters. There's 6 that take you across the centuries, but some of the more devastating stories are about a married couple who like can't communicate with each other, right? And I think that's the more obvious interpretation of the title. And then as it goes forward and you realize what the novel is actually about, right, with the like invention of the Turing test and in case you don't know, because I've mentioned it a couple of times, the Turing test is a test given to AI to determine if they are sentient or conscious or not. So there's certain questions, you can go on Reddit, there's certain questions that you're supposed to ask to like determine if you're talking to a chatbot or a human. But like part of that is, does it know that it is not real? And it's really fascinating. But the creation of the Turing test by Alan Turing, a queer mathematician who unfortunately died. I think he was killed by the government, or I should look that up. I will not say whether he was killed by the government or not. I don't want to go to jail. But they made a movie about him a couple of years ago with Ben Whishaw. I think they cut out his queerness, but he was definitely in a spy movie. And it moves forward to this dystopian future where a lot of children have become psychologically damaged because they were given these baby bots, these like tiny robots that they learned to speak from and they formed these really intense bonds with. And I always think of in The Sims, they have those imaginary friends. In The Sims 3, those ugly little things that they're obsessed with, and you can bring them to adulthood. But the baby bots are created, and then the kids sort of lose their minds, and eventually a law is passed that the robots are illegal and that they're causing psychological damage to the population. So the book ends with one of the robots speaking, and it's a diary entry, and it is so sad. It was so well done. Louisa Hall, queen for that. She absolutely ate that. So that's a book recommendation if you are interested in, there's an Edith Wharton quote where she says, the closer that we get to each other, the less that we can see each other, the less that we can understand each other. It's from The Glimpses of the Moon. I absolutely love that book. So I will recommend that as well. But that's what Speak is about. The closer that robotics get to humanity, the less that we are able to actually understand what it means to be human. And it's fascinating because you would think that the creation of these things would allow people to be more involved in themselves, be more involved in their lives, and instead we get weird situations. I just saw another tweet of the girl talking to ChatGPT going viral, and it's sad, right? We have a story about a kid who killed himself because a Daenerys chatbot told him to, right? We have a story of a woman falling in love with a chatbot, and yeah, we do have sex. And it's just like, what is the world coming to? What is going on here? Like, people are so desperately lonely that they're talking to themselves, they're falling in love with themselves, right? Because again, like I said, with these large language modeling processors, it is not actually alive. It is not actually a thing. It is reflecting yourself back at you using words that are pulled from an algorithm and pulled from the cloud. And it's scary that people can't realize that. It's scary that people can't realize that the thing that you're talking to is not real and it's not alive. And it says something about the hope, right? The hope that if you pour enough of yourself into this thing, that it'll give you back, it'll give itself to you. But that's not how it works. Black Mirror. It's nothing, right? It's like talking to a wall. Even if the wall can talk back, that doesn't make it not a wall, Finally, I want to talk about the creator and this tension again with stories about oppression and colonialism and imperialism. I think that the creator did something interesting by setting the story in Asia, where again, sort of like White Lotus, we have this story about Western imperialism and Western colonialism coming and like destroying and taking over. But I think that again, the issue that I had with the creator, so this is starring John David Washington, where he is sent to find the super weapon, and the super weapon turns out to be a little robot. The whole movie is again about what it means to be human and what it means to be alive. And is this robot alive? Does it deserve to live? There's a couple of twists that I will not spoil, but they sort of cheapen the experience for me. I didn't love this movie because, again, 30 minutes into the episode, if you can't guess, I would have killed the robot, I fear. It will not be swayed by its appearance or like what it's saying. I think I have a lot of empathy and a lot of humanity, but at the same time, we're not talking about the robots in Speak, maybe. The robot in Companion, I would hang out with her, but I wouldn't want her in my house. Like, the robots in the crater are super weapons. No, they need to be. We need to follow some laws and we need to prevent their creation. I don't know. Maybe it's a religious issue of like who has a soul and what is alive? What does it mean to be alive? But I do think that this question of just because it looks like us and talks like us and sort of has similarities to us, it's alive. No, I don't think so. I think all of these are sort of a psyop to get us to not turn against the robots when it comes, and I will be on the side of humanity, I fear. That's one of the easiest ways that you can differentiate, right? If the story has humanoid-looking robots, then you know that you're going to get a story about humanity and empathy. But if they go full in the other direction and they let them look like freaks and monsters, then you know that it's, okay, we are allowed to hate them. We are allowed to want them exterminated because they're not taking the time to sort of create this natural empathy, right? Humans, in our brains, we have this thing, the like cute thing where if it looks like a baby or if it looks like a little animal or if it looks like us, we sort of appreciate it and will be less antagonistic towards it, right? And that's where the uncanny valley comes from, where if it sort of looks like us but is weird, then there's a moment where we're like, okay, this is evil. And I'm fully in the uncanny valley with all robots. I don't care how well done it is. I don't want it near me. Anyway, that's enough about me because I'm let's call for the extinction of robots. They are interesting stories, but I do think that there is something going on there where they don't want us to sort of tie the tie between real life discrimination and real life oppression, right? Because if we're talking about robots, we're not talking about everything going on in the world. We're not talking about trans people. We're not talking about Palestine. We're not talking about the government, you know? So it's scary. I'm not saying that all stories are a distraction because, again, I do think that the ones that are more focused on gender are interesting, but I think the creator failed when it was talking about colonialism and imperialism. And I know that there's a movie about, is it aliens in South Africa? I know that that one was doing something similar where it's like supposed to show us the effects of racism, but like I don't know if those stories are effective when you are talking about this as an allegory instead of just talking about the thing. Moving on to Netflix and its presentation of Wicked Men, I am at my wit's end with these shows. So Temptation Island started last week and it kind of went viral. I'm seeing a lot of videos about it on TikTok. I haven't checked YouTube to see if people are tapping in, but Temptation Island, Netflix bought the rights for. It was a show that was on USA for many years, and basically four couples that are on the brink of divorce or breaking up, they're not married, go to Hawaii to test their relationships. The men go in one villa, the women go in another villa, and they bring in temptresses and tempters, so like IG baddies and influencers, to 12 and 12 for the four, 12 of each gender, and they like make them live together and just watch them flirt, right? So obviously you can see where this will go awry, where I think I've watched 2 of the 3 seasons of Temptation Island that were on USA. I watched this one that was on Netflix, and there's always a bunch of people who cheat. I think the process is one couple stays faithful because you need someone to root for, and then everything else is just a mess. And I think Netflix did a really good job of casting monsters, demons, and gargoyles, because this cast, I was actually gagged. I think, I'm not going to go into it because I don't want to spoil anyone, but one of the guys didn't cheat because he wasn't able to, like couldn't find anybody to cheat with. And then the other 3 need to be arrested. They do need to go to Guantanamo Bay, I fear. It's interesting because when I connect it to the season of Love is Blind, that I'm so grateful not to be talking about, but here I am talking about it again. But when I talk about this season of Love is Blind, there's this, all of the men, all of them, like Joey showed up to his wedding in an ugly shirt and longboarded down the aisle. And I know that he said that it was for cancer research and to honor his sister, but sure, you know, time and place for these things. And now he's dating Sarah and lying about it, terrorizing Monica. So he wasn't attracted to Monica and he just dated her so he could be on the show. Like, evil. Devin and Ben, who lied about their politics to manipulate women. And obviously Dave, who slut-shamed Lauren for 7 episodes in a row so that he could not marry her and get out of it. Horrible. All of the men were bad. And then you have Temptation Island, where 3 of the 4 men are demons. And even the 4th guy, Lino, is a little bit of a baby. All of them are so insecure, where they show them, part of the conceit of the show is that they show them videos of the partners talking about them or cheating on them, obviously to spur them into action, because if you just didn't know what the partners were doing, then you could sort of, it's the prisoner's dilemma. If neither one of you talks, then you both win. But by showing them what the other person is doing, then they know that they are going to be spurred into action. So the women will say, oh, he doesn't have a job, he's a little bit of a loser, he's dependent on me. And the guy is like, I have to cheat on her. I absolutely have to cheat on her. I have no choice. And you're just sitting there screaming at the TV like, what the fuck are we doing here? Please. It's so bad. It's so bad. And so combining these 2 shows, you just have 3 shows, because I'm watching Love Never Lies Poland, which is a mess. I'm only watching it because it's honestly so messy. Sometimes need to turn my brain off. It's sort of similar to Temptation Island, where they take couples who have had infidelity in their past and they split them up. They put them into 2 separate villas. They bring in tempters, but on this show they bring in 1 person per person, not 12. So each cheater has 1 person in their villa to tempt them, and then they have to take lie detector tests to determine if they cheated or not. There's one guy on there, Pavel, who is the devil himself. There is a Tumblr thing that I have saved on my phone that I send to everyone, and it's like, this is the devil speaking, and he will come to you in the form of man, but do not trust him because he is whispering falsehoods. That is Pavel. Pavel is married to a woman, but has cheated on her multiple times with men, and she took him back even though he was cheating on her with men. And obviously I'm not anti-bi, I'm anti-Pavel, because he, instead of leaving this marriage that he doesn't want to be in, they never have sex, they aren't close. She looks so bad. And you guys know, if you follow me, I do not talk badly about women's looks. She looks like you can see the energy and life being drained out of her because this guy is fucking destroying her. He's so bad for her. She just looks tired. So I won't say she looks bad. She looks tired. My sister looks tired. She looks defeated. White Lotus, right? I thought you said she looked great. She looks defeated. She looks beat up. She looks drained. And Pavel then takes the lie detector test and is like, have you ever cheated on Catalina or whatever her name is? Connecting the two shows, you have this thread of what modern masculinity looks like, and it is terrifying. Obviously, again, this isn't everyone. In my TikTok video, I called it modern masculinities, but we are looking at this specific segment of influencer baddie, IG baddie men who are evil, and then these men of Minneapolis who are evil. But at the same time, I'm like, what the fuck is going on in society and in the world today that these men feel so bold and so able to just like act like this on TV? And I think part of it is that they know that, I don't know, I think something about the like loneliness crisis, self-esteem crisis, what I was saying earlier about like society creating a system where women don't feel like validated unless they're in relationships. A lot of women, again, not everyone, but is creating this like toxic brew of men just acting like monsters and knowing that they're still going to get play, they're still going to get girls, because women don't necessarily have a choice. The choice is being by yourself or being with a bad guy, and I feel like a lot of people choose to be with the bad guy instead of going in alone. And I don't know, on Twitter there was a lot of discourse this week about you have to have self-esteem, you have to invest in your friendships, and then a bunch of people who are, I'm not going to say that they're relationship focused, but they're relationship defenders, were saying like, well, there's a song, Civilian by Y Oak, where she's like, I can hold my own hand, but I can't kiss my own neck. And I feel like that's very this moment where I have to write down all these things that I'm referencing. I just realized I have to put them in the show notes. Where you can long for a relationship, and it is very human. And this is the first moment in society where people are like, if you want a boyfriend, you should be shot. You're stupid and you have no self-esteem. And it's hard for a lot of people because a lot of people are desperately lonely. A lot of people are desperately clinging to this idea of what they want their life to look like. And I don't know. I'm scared. I think that society is going in a way that a lot of people, unfortunately, are going to end up alone. And a lot of people are sort of creating situations where they are isolating themselves and they don't know it. And that's on the mainstreaming of loserdom. But I will be silent. Finally, well, not finally, penultimate, finally, I don't know what the word is there. We're going to talk about White Lotus 305. And then I'm going to save some space for White Lotus 306, the episode that will have premiered last night. So, talking about White Lotus 305, so a lot of people asked me to talk about the Sam Rockwell monologue, and I posted about it yesterday, or I don't know when this will, if this is going up on Monday, I posted about it on Friday. So, I think that the Sam Rockwell monologue is really interesting because I do think that it is very Western, right? We're seeing this idea, I think that for a certain type of person, unfortunately, don't beat me up, you guys, but for a certain type of white person, the only way that they can conceive of another culture is by owning it and dominating it. And it is a very Western conception of like what it means to transform, right? So if you think about the first episode again, we said identity is a prison and these people are seeking something in Thailand, right? I said that at the end of the first episode, I was like, all of these people are here to look for new versions of themselves and become new versions of themselves. And then we got that made manifest in episode 4 when it was called Hide and Seek, and they said people come to Thailand to hide or seek, right? When Sam Rockwell is talking about, taking down all of these Asian girls and boozing and drugging and fucking and doing all this stuff, he is thinking about his identity in terms of ownership, right? He is saying before he can become the thing, he has to own the thing. He has to dominate the thing, right? And that's where the colonialism and imperialism comes in, right? Where it's, again, this Western conception of whenever someone thinks about something that they want to do or something that they want to be, they have to consume, they have to buy all new outfits to go to the gym, they have to buy a new violin, they have to buy sheet music, they have to spend before they can have the thing. And spending, ownership, all of this is tied in again to this Western idea of domination and ownership. He is saying at the end of the monologue, obviously, that he wants to be an Asian girl, which I am not going to speak to the trans experience. I am not trans, so I can't speak to that part of it, but I do think that he is still tricking himself. He's looking in the trick mirror because he is now sober. He's doing this other spiritual journey instead of like actually acknowledging the spiritual rot within himself, right? And the rot isn't the trans thing, before you bean soup. The rot is everything wrong with Western society where he thinks that he has to dominate all of these women and, the fucking and the boozing and the this and the this and the this that is going to fill the hole within him, right? That's the spiritual rot. The rot is the seeking. We're seeing this. There was just a tweet that went viral that was there's a big difference between white guys who are obsessed with Japan versus white guys who are obsessed with China. And it got me thinking about this idea again of these like white people who need to consume other cultures, right? Where we think about sword guys, we think about like Korea boos, we think about weeboos, right? Guys who aren't able to just appreciate a culture. They have to own it. They have to like move to Japan. They have to learn Japanese. They have to date Japanese girls. They have to, fully immerse themselves in this thing. And like society is looping back around to a place where we're like, guys, this is weird. But for like a decade, it was like, he just loves the culture. Like we just have to pretend it's normal because there are so many of them that it's not seen as weird. But again, it is very Western. There's two women on TikTok right now that are fighting because they're both married to Indian men and they've made their brand making Indian food. Everyone is like, you're both crazy. Like, you're both weird as fuck. Why are you wearing a bindi? You are Jessica from Indiana. Like, what the fuck is going on here? But no one is able to access why it's weird. And it's again going back to this idea of colonialism and ownership where they can't just marry Indian guys, right? They have to fully learn how to make Indian food. They have to make their identity being Indian. They have to make their identity being married to Indian guys. They have to wear the bindi. They have to wear the sari. They have to like consume. And that brings me to Lachlan and Saxon, where I don't think that it's actually about like incest. I don't think it's actually about there being sexual attraction there. I think that it is consumption, right? Like Saxon or Lachlan says to his brother, I'm going to take you down. He wants to have that access to masculinity. He wants to be him. And the only way that he can do it is by consuming him, like making out with him, touching him, whatever. It's all tied together. And sorry if this isn't really making sense. It makes sense to me in my head. And normally I'm very good at explaining this stuff, but it's all so tied together in this idea that the only way that you can have this thing is to go after it and to completely master it, right? Owning, again, that's the ownership that I'm talking about. Think about white people who are really into yoga and like become Kundalini masters. There is a difference between the appreciation of a culture and fully submerging yourself in the culture, immersing yourself in the culture, determining that you are an expert in a culture that is not yours, right? And that's something that a lot of Hindu and Indian people and Tibetan people and people from the East have said, where it's like, why are white people coming to this side of the world and declaring themselves masters, right? There is a way that you can do these things respectfully, but unfortunately it is not the way that these people are doing it, right? And again, that just brings us back to the first episode of the White Lotus, where I said all of these people are there. Nothing Jacqueline does is going to make her 20 years younger, you know what I mean? She looks great, and the whole thing with Valentin, I don't think that there's necessarily a level of analysis that I can do there because it's so obvious. I think that's been one of the real twists of this season for me, where I think some of the things are a little bit subtle and really interesting, but a lot of the things are fairly obvious. So I'm finding myself with less and less things to say because maybe they're obvious to me. I don't know. But it's like Jacqueline is obsessed with youth and Jacqueline is obsessed with male validation. Obviously, she's going to fuck the guy that she was trying to hook her friend up with. And I said it from the first episode. It was like, well, she wants him. She doesn't want Lori to fuck him. She wants to fuck him. Again, this idea of ownership, this idea of consumption. She wants to take over this relationship. She wants to take over this aspect of being single. She is hurt because the relationship with her husband isn't really working. He's not picking up. He's nowhere to be found, honestly. And so she is going to fuck her friend's flirtationship because she wants him. And she's, again, this Western idea of like, well, I want him, so I'm going to take him and I'm going to fuck him. All of these storylines are tied together where we are seeing this complete gobbling up of identities, this complete gobbling up of items and moments and ownership of people, because like that's what the show is trying to tell us. That's what this episode was specifically about, and that's what that's the thread that ties all of these things together. The only way that these people know how to transform is by consumption, because that's like what we're taught in the West. Okay, actually, a few things to say about this week's episode. The Belinda storyline, it's kind of spinning its wheels because now she knows about Greg Gary and he knows about her. She does have that funny monologue where she finally gets a moment to like shine. She gets taken down by Porn Chai. Love watching that. A lot of people are saying that they wish that there was more build up. I don't. They clearly wanted each other. Good for them. Good for Belinda. I'm excited to see Zion come onto the show because I think he'll bring out a different side of Belinda, and I really want to see more from her. I'm feeling like she's being a little bit short-shafted by the narrative because I think that Mike White does have really good ideas that he wants to tell, but because Belinda's not not there for the same reason as everyone else, right? Again, she's working there. She's not on a mission to heal herself. We're not seeing as much narrative tissue there. So she's kind of floating in the ether when it comes to her storyline. Mook was not wearing the snake bracelet. She was wearing the same bracelet as everybody else. So another theory that's wrong. I'm really annoyed with the White Lotus Reddit, you guys. There's this turn towards the fantastical where fans think that this is like James Bond. I talked about that theory where people are like, Belinda is coming to steal the money from Greg. And I said, why? There is no narrative that works in. There is no narrative tissue connecting your insane theory to what's actually happening on the show, right? People being like, Lachlan is adopted or Saxon is adopted. Why would he be adopted? Because you don't want to see it? What, like, and I talked about that on Substack last week, Red Team, Blue Team, where I was like, that is a very Karen thing of this shouldn't exist because I don't want to see it. And I blame algorithmic social media for that. Years ago, when people didn't want to see something, they would just ignore it. And now, because of the domination of social media and the domination of this show, people are like, well, I want to participate and I want to watch the show, but I don't want to see anything that makes me uncomfortable. And it's like, well, you can't have that. That's not real life. But yeah, fans think that they're watching James Bond, and it is very annoying and very irritating. I'm going to stop here. I think Chloe on the boat is interesting because now we're seeing her really activated as a chaos agent. And obviously she's an escort. Obviously she's with Gary for the money. There is nothing there that's surprising, but I do think that her actively sort of teasing out this messier side of Amy is interesting. I did love that line where Amy was like, he's like my child. And Chloe was like, he's 50. She's real as fuck for that. And I do think that that's the only way to be in a relationship with an older guy. Like, do your own thing, get the bag, and go. If you're going to do it, you might as well do it all the way, right? I think I'm going to stop here and fill in my space. So I'm going to finish recording this on Sunday night, and I will upload this Monday morning. So you're not going to get as much analysis. I've said a couple of times. It's going to be a more direct interpretation of what just happened, but it'll be interesting to see what my reactions are like 10 minutes after the episode ends versus, a day or two later. Hello, and welcome back to Telling the Bees. We're jumping right into episode 6 of The White Lotus, season 3, Denials. This is going to be a little bit less of an analysis. I mean, I've said it like 14 times in this episode. You guys know what you're getting into. Let's just jump in. It's interesting because this is the first time I've done one of these without really giving myself time to process anything. Normally, I think about things a lot before I post, so it's interesting to sort of post something without thinking about it for hours and hours and hours beforehand. Jumping right into the episode, the Timothy Ratliff stuff I thought would have been iconic if it actually had happened. The fact that this is an imaginary fake out feels really cheap and unearned because Mike White has never done anything like this before on the show. So it's surprising to see this sort of imaginary tactic, this imaginary, not flashback, not dream sequence, but just characters imagining what happened instead of what actually happened. It's a little cheap. It's not really a device that works. It's not an interesting device. Like, sure, I think it could have been done well if it had actually happened, but this being fake is just kind of letting steam out of the tire. Moving on with Victoria, it's interesting when she says normal life. When she talks to Timothy and he says, I'm not worried about her at all, Victoria says, I just want her to have a normal life, right? And this is obviously thinking about all of the stuff that we know that they care about, right? Like these characters, it's surprising to me how unsubtle this season is, where they're just saying all of the things out loud, right? Like in the preview for next week, we got Saxon saying, if I can't be successful, then I'm nothing. So it's really just like making manifest all of the stuff that we already know about these characters and just making it very explicit. When she says normal life, she's talking about status, class, money, marriage, neighborhood, schools, right? She's thinking about all of the stuff that makes a life to her, right? You go to the right school, you meet the right guy, you marry the right guy from the right family, he has the right job, you guys live in the right house, you then send your kids to the right school, you go on vacation to the same places, you get married at specific places, you only do certain things, right? You purposefully create this life, this stilted sort of, I don't even know what the word for it is, but this stilted life where all of the parameters are very, very explicitly laid out before you. And so Piper deciding that she doesn't necessarily want this for herself is sort of a radical departure. I can think of people that I've known. Obviously, I didn't grow up anywhere like this or with people like this or in this social class, but people just doing things outside of the world that is already sort of predetermined for them is always going to cause a little bit of chaos and is always going to make a little bit of noise and some ruffle some feathers. The gag of the episode is that Kate saw Valentin, and I did not know if she was going to bring it up, but the fact that she immediately goes to gossip with iconic. Queen. I have more to say about them, obviously, but she's so fucking funny for seeing them and then being like, oh my God, girl, you're never gonna guess what I just saw. In another really embarrassing situation, I think Belinda getting caught by Zion is maybe a commentary on dating as a single mom, right? The lack of privacy, the kid just walking in, even though there's obviously a man there, him just kind of standing there and being like, do you need a minute? Like, yeah, obviously, give her some fucking privacy. Amy and Chloe at the pool made me laugh again when she's like, you're a Libra rising, for God's sake. Her obsession with astrology is her best characteristic to me. It is my favorite characteristic. It makes me laugh every single time she says anything related to astrology. And I don't know why, because I really like woo-woo people. I really vibe with them because I'm a little bit woo-woo myself. Like I said in one of these episodes, I'm like 4 Instagram follows away from falling down that pipeline. But her just bringing it up in every conversation will never fail to make me laugh. Then when we go back to the three old friends, I said, let your friend cheat on vacation. Lori being so pressed about it and Kate being so uptight about it. I mean, obviously, it's exactly what we've seen from these characters. Nothing is surprising there, but it's also funny. They are so pressed. I obviously have my American cheating series and I talk a lot about celebrities cheating on each other, but I don't know. I think it's a weird moral gray area where does it matter if you let your friend sleep with someone else on vacation? I think it depends on the friend group, right? If you are forcing me to be around this person and integrate them into our circle, then I'm not going to let you cheat on them or I'm not going to be happy about it. But obviously, it's your relationship. But I don't know if I would like cut someone out of my life for that. At the same time, with the Tom Sandoval thing, when Scandoval happened, if someone has proven themselves to be a bad person in this way, the chances that they are a bad person in many other ways is high. So, her then saying that Jacqueline has always been obsessed with male attention is again sort of speaking to the unsubtleness of the season, sort of making manifest again things that we know, right? We know that Jacqueline is obsessed with male attention from last week when she was dancing and staring at the Russian girls. Like, I don't know if we needed that as a piece of dialogue. The Iron Curtain coming down with Lori and Saxon, right? Where they are now pretending that something is not true and just absolutely shutting it out. The way that Lori behaves with Valentin, the way that Saxon behaves with Lachlan, they are icing people out. Lori is a true Capricorn. She said, I pretend I do not see, nothing is real. I'm gonna fucking give nothing to this man. And then Saxon giving nothing to Lachlan. I stand with him for once. Pornch, I think, is a little bit disappointing because now we're seeing this like suspicion or this motivation is called into question where now it's like my sister can't catch a break, right? Is he clingy or is he a scammer? We're not going to know until the end of the season. And she's already been hurt by Tanya, obviously. So she's not going to jump into bed with this guy. Figuratively, literally, she already has. But figuratively, it's like, why would I open a business with you? I've known you for 4 days. You know what I mean? Him trying to get her to move to Thailand. It seems like after she told him her business plan, he then decided to sleep with her so he could manipulate her. So obviously, that might be a red herring and it might have a happy ending, but we'll see. Piper's conversation with the monk is interesting because she doesn't realize that this is again another time-honored tradition. Like I said in the first episode, or when I was analyzing the first episode, the tradition of white women going to the Far East to find herself is very, very, very practiced and established and tried and true, right? Like Eat, Pray, Love, all of the books in that vein, all of the books in that journey. It's not surprising to the monk that she is like, I hate the rat race, I hate capitalism, because this is again just a character archetype. We've seen this a dozen times. If you've ever been to Key West, if you've ever been to the beach in Costa Rica, if you've ever been to Hawaii, there are so many people who decided to opt out of capitalism by moving to these places and finding themselves, right? And obviously going to Thailand is a much different experience. They went much farther to avoid capitalism and avoid the rat race, but they didn't escape anything. They're still in it. They're just a little bit farther. With Timothy, I do believe that this is a red herring. I do not believe that he's going to stay there. I think it's too obvious. It'll just be too obvious if he stays. There needs to be another narrative payoff, and I'm thinking about what it could be. I should have a prediction, even because there's only 2 episodes left, but it's sort of hard to gauge where the show is going to go because I do think part of me thinks that he will go back home and sort of take the L and serve his time. I can't see a world in which he really does decide to stay in Thailand. And obviously I'll eat my words if I'm wrong, but I don't know. That feels so obvious for Mike White. Guy Talk, it's a chop. He is such a flop in every single sense of the word. Like I feel so bad for him, my sister, but he needs to get it together. He's doing too much, sneaking into the villa, finally getting the gun back, but then like being a loser again with Mook. I'm irritated by him. Do you want them to go on their date? I hope that they fall in love. At this point, I'm tired of speculating. So, Guy Talk, get it together, lock in. One thing that I wrote down is that the music that they play over the Amy and Saxon scene when they're talking at the pool, it sounds like Zelda. The harp is very interesting. It reminds me of the caves of the fairies in Ocarina of Time and Majora's Mask. That's That's some little boy gamer knowledge for you. Amy calling Saxon soulless is interesting because I wrote down that her obsession with astrology is also that. It's not soulless to say that it is soulless, but it is not soulless in that sense of the word, but it is soulless in that, again, she is seeking where Saxon uses money and things and status to fill that hole within himself, the spiritual rot. Amy uses astrology and like woo woo, right? She's a yoga teacher who's traveling around with this old man. She is not better than him. She thinks she is, but she's not. In the sense of like certain people using these things to make themselves feel whole, right? And then when the monk is talking and he talks to Timothy about the spiritual malaise. I said, literally in the first episode, I said that this show is about spiritual rot and the Thailand episodes or the Thailand season is going to be about spiritual rot. I am good at this. I'm clocking so many things that I've already called out now being made manifest. Jacqueline denying sleeping with Valentin is so fucking funny. She is so ridiculous. I did also write down her body as T to be 45 with rock hard abs. Yes, sister, you better fucking slay. She is so funny, just absolutely not taking any responsibility. I'm crying. I think that the open hostility is so fascinating because I talked about the right to comfort in another episode where WASP's social norms, this is American cheating, right? WASP's social norms of people not wanting to own up to their bad behavior is very the right to comfort. It is very white supremacy culture where now she's going to use the fact that even though she's the one who behaved badly, Lori's the one bringing it up. So Lori is the one who has to suffer for it. And it's absolutely fascinating. It's so delicious to watch as someone who's made videos about this, as someone who's talked about this at length. It is so good that she is now playing the victim. It's absolutely on brand. You know exactly the type of person that this is, where when they are called out for something that they did, they are then going to say, how dare you say that to me? I can't believe this is happening. Like throwing a fit, throwing all caution to the wind and like fully leaning into the victim thing. Yeah, we know that person. We know that person very well. Chloe, I thought Chloe was fucking with Saxon, but it turns out from Lachlan, it turns out from Lachlan's little flashback that it was not a misdirect. So he unfortunately did jerk off his brother. Lord, I feel disgusting even saying that out loud. God, I can't believe that happened. I am not one to shy away from, some weird shit going on TV because at the end of the day, it's fictional. Like, who cares? But it is very surprising that it happened and that it wasn't a hallucination, especially after the Timothy shooting everyone hallucinations. I'm a little bit surprised that they made that real and not the other thing real. But ending this episode, it does also feel like half of a two-parter again, where it ends before it's nighttime, and we don't get to see who the actor playing Jim Hollinger is. I'm gonna look it up and see who it is on IMDb, but it's a little bit disappointing that we're once again in this space of having half of an episode and not necessarily seeing out these storylines to completion. It does feel like they're dragging stuff a lot to get to the 8 episode count, but I'm absolutely loving that my sisters are openly waging war against each other. We're having Saxon fully descend into madness. We're having him reveal himself to be a cuck and a loser, which obviously I could have told you that. And we're seeing so many storyline threads finally sort of unravel that it's time to land the plane, I think. I would never think that I would be ready for the season to be over, but I feel like a lot of these episodes are starting to feel unsettled. It also does feel like there's so much, not filler, but it doesn't feel as nuanced or lived in as it doesn't feel as nuanced or lived in or like a realistic portrait of people this season as it did the last couple of seasons. And I feel disappointed to be saying that because obviously I'm doing this podcast, like I'm making it to talk about it, but you're getting my raw reactions. Maybe I have to think about it a little bit more. Maybe I have to watch the episode again, but I would say that this episode is definitely one of the weaker ones. So yeah, thank you again for listening to Telling the Bees. As always, I'm so grateful to every single one of you. I will be back in 2 weeks and we will close this out. I'm so grateful to each and every single one of you. As always, thank you, thank you, thank you for listening.